Hey, what's up guys? So in this video I wanted to talk a little bit about our procedure for stacking cell phone towers or building cell phone towers. This is an operation we do quite a lot, so I figured it'd be nice to have some sort of commentary slash tutorial on this type of operation. I've divided it up into different sections. We'll start looking at the preparation and then move over to the procedure itself, and then towards the end we'll talk a little bit about safety aspects that are specific to this type of sling operation. So here you see how we attach the slings to the top. They always have to be in the same spot on each corner, and obviously the slings all need to be the same length. This is the bottom of the section. Now, even though the shape of the segments themselves are a little bit conical, these little squares denote which way is down. And this is where they connect the ground wire that goes all the way from the top up in the lightning rod all the way down to the ground. And this here is the top of a section. This one has 3 bolt holes. It can also have 4. But these are the flanges that the segments rest upon, and then you put bolts through each of the holes to hold them securely together. These tools are used to align the bolt holes with each other when stacking the segments. They also make music. So here's an example, the segment coming down, and then it is easier to align the bolt holes. When the pilot holds a little bit of weight, you can just use your own force to move it that last bit to make the holes align. So this is the foundation of the tower. Each corner has 3 bolts sticking out, and then you attach 1 nut to each bolt, and then that is what the tower will rest upon. Sometimes there's also 4 bolts on each corner. So here's a bottom section coming in. On this particular site there's 3 guys on the receiving end. It can also be 2, but that is the absolute minimum. So each guy is responsible for his own corner, and the pilot is responsible for the main positioning of the segment or the element. So in this case, each person is responsible for his own corner, and then just making sure that each of the bolts sticking out from the foundations go through the bolt holes in the bottom flange of the section. And here they're getting some additional help with the cables from a 4th guy. So here, when the section is all the way down resting on the bolts, it is completely safe to send the helicopter away. But some people like to keep it around just in case they notice that they've rotated it wrong or they need to adjust something. But technically the helicopter isn't doing anything right now. So he gives the sign for cut, and the helicopter drops the slings and flies away. So here's a different one, only 2 guys on the receiving end this time. And you'll notice there's also 4 bolt holes here. And this is a bigger bottom section, so it's wider. So not always as easy, but usually they go on pretty well. So they each take control of 1 corner each. He checks that 4 goes in, and then they go to the second one to make sure that goes in. And then this is a little bit stuck. So he just wiggles it and hops on it a little bit. And then it's all the way down on all 3 corners, sorry. And with that, he sends the helicopter away. So here it's obviously completely safe, and it's technically not a Heslo 4 operation yet. In this case, One of the bolts are misaligned and it won't go on the rightmost corner. Here you can see he's banging on it, and he gets a big 2x4. And finally, there you go. He was able to crank it on, and then we can build the rest of the tower. And when the bottom section is on, they climb up to the first level, and that's where they wait for the second section. Here, we're going to talk a little bit about this in the next parts, but basically from here on out, section 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, all the sections are going to be exactly the same. So as I mentioned, once you have the bottom section on, the rest of the sections are going to be pretty much exactly the same. They're going to differ a little bit in weight, but the procedure is going to be exactly the same. So I'll use this part of the video to show the mounting of a section from different angles, and we'll start out with a first-person view of the crew in the tower. So here, in this part, it's important not to pull too hard. You just want to let the pilot do the heavy lifting, and then your main job is going to be the crew's main job is going to be that each man has his or her own corner, and then get this pike in. That's your main job. Once this pike is in, the thing is pretty much secured. And here you can see him adjusting it, and that is done by the helicopter holding about maybe 60% of the weight of the load, and then you can just use your own force to move it that last half a centimeter to 1 centimeter. So now he's put one bolt in from the underside and up, and now he's going to crank it, and then he just put a bolt from the top down in the last remaining bolt hole. Um, and what they'll do is they'll each tighten one bolt all the way in each corner, and then before climbing up you can either leave it like that depending on how high the tower is, or you can add more bolts. This bolt is now properly tightened, so this corner is done. So he's going to take the pike out, and then he'll just wait for the other two guys to get their corner done. And once that is done, he'll have a visual confirmation from the two other crew members, and then he will signal the pilot with a hand signal that he can release the slings. So this is the pilot's perspective, and now you can see inside this section, you can see there's a line going over on one of the sides, and that's the ladder, and that's what we use to align the section with the one that's already on the ground. So right now it's on the left side, and then you can see on the one on the ground it's going to be on the right side, so it has to rotate now 90 degrees more clockwise. And this already has a little bit of rotation, which works out pretty well, because the pilot can just sit and wait, and then once he sees it's almost there, he can move the section in over to the guys. If this doesn't happen, if it's completely still, you have to hold it outside usually, and then the guys will rotate it and orient it correctly, and then the pilot will move the section over the top. And once it's on, like here, You just want to sit and wait while the guys secure one bolt on each corner, while keeping about 50% of the load of the section on the line. And the reason you want to keep 50% is because sometimes the bolt holes, as I've mentioned earlier, don't align, so you have to help lift it while they use those pikes to really get them aligned. But once you have one bolt on each corner, there's basically nothing more the helicopter can do to help. So then you can reduce the weight and just keep the lines taut until they give the sign for release, and then you go back and get another section. And here's a clip of the section not rotating. So in this case, the guys in the tower have to rotate it. And here it's important not to rotate it too fast, and we'll come back to that in part 3. Alright, so back to the clip where part 1 ended. So the helicopter comes in, and then each guy grabs his own corner and then helps guide the flanges down on top of each other. So each guy has his own corner, and then the helicopter slightly lowers the section down until the flanges meet, and then the pikes go in, and from here on out the section is pretty much secured. So here the helicopter just keeps a little bit of weight on the section, as I talked about earlier, about 50%, and then the guys can use the pikes or the spears to align the bolt holes 100%. And here you can see the section is brought in over top while it's rotated. That last 90 degrees, and this just goes bang on. And that's it's very nice when that happens. Basically here the corner is secured, so they each focus on their first corner, and then they both move to the last corner. So as I mentioned earlier, once the bottom section is on, the procedure for all the subsequent sections are going to be pretty much exactly the same. So you rotate it, and then the pilot moves the section over top and then lowers it down slightly, while each crew member focuses on his corner, and then once the flanges connect, get the pike in and then start working on the bolts. And with that, we're going to end part 2 and move over to part 3, where we'll talk a little bit about safety aspects that are particular to this type of operation. The most important part about this type of operation is to have a thorough brief before starting to make sure that everybody's on the same page, and then throughout the operation to have good communication both between the pilot and the crew, and also within the crew itself. It's also important to stay within the weight limits and the weather limits, and if all these things are met, this type of operation usually goes very smoothly. So let's talk a little bit about the main form of communication, which is the hand signals. So here, one hand out means hold altitude. The pilot goes a little bit up, so he's going to use the down signal, which is pointing down and rotating your hand. That's the down signal. Now the pilot comes down, but he goes a little bit too low, so he gives another sign for up, which is pointing up and rotating. Hold, and then we rotate, and then once all hands are on, the pilot just slowly lowers the section down until the flanges connect, like so. Pikes go in and they start working on the bolts. When it comes to hand signals, the most important part is that the last sign, which is release slings, is only done by one person in the crew in the tower. And the signal should only be given when he has visually confirmed and gotten the signal from the other crew members that they are done with their respective corners. Also, you could give the radio message in addition to the hand signal, but this will be discussed in the brief beforehand so that the pilot doesn't release unless he gets both the hand signal and the radio signal. The next thing I want to talk about is probably what is the biggest risk with this type of operation, and that is namely getting your fingers squeezed in between the sections. As you've seen from the previous clips, there's plenty of chances to get your fingers caught in between. So it's very important that this type of operation is done slowly and gently, and that the crew members are each focused on their hand position. And basically, never keep your hand in a position that, should the segment that is being mounted drop and hit the segment that is being worked from, that your hand is not in a position that it will be caught in between. Here is a nice example of the guy in the white helmet being very aware of his right hand, opening his hand, and never keeping his hand below the flange, always above it until the segment is mounted all the way down. Another big part of hand safety is to make sure that the loadmaster brushes each of the bottom flanges and clears each of the holes from dirt and sand and debris before sending it away. This is not something that should be done when it arrives at the tower to be assembled. And if there should be snow or ice or dirt, it is way better to send it back and have the loadmaster do it on the ground, because as you can see here, this is not where you want to be putting your fingers through the holes and brushing the flanges from dirt and various debris. Sometimes you can see here the segments are stacked quite close together, and in that case it's smart to lift it out before you have the loadmaster brush it. And also in winter, with snow and ice, it's very smart to bring a gas burner so that you can burn off ice and stuff that is stuck on the bottom flanges before sending it away. The next thing I want to point out is that, especially when flying with longer lines, say 36 meters and up when assembling the tower, please be very careful when rotating the segments to align them with the one being worked from, because if they're rotated quickly and only stopped by one person, the new axis of rotation won't be the center of the load, but rather the place at which it was stopped. That means that the load will start to oscillate, which also means that the pilot will have an increased workload because now he has to stop the oscillation before continuing with the assembly. As you can see in this clip here, the helicopter is pretty much stationary, and here the crew is doing a good job of letting the helicopter do the main positioning of the segment and then just grabbing each corner once they can reach it. It is important in this stage of the operation not to try to pull your corner towards you too hard, because if the helicopter pilot doesn't notice that the load is off center, your arms are going to run out of strength pretty quickly, and when you have to let go, the load is going to start to oscillate. In this clip here, the guys in the tower are a little bit eager with the rotation, and this is, in my opinion, too fast of a rotation. And if this was stopped by only one person instead of two, the rotation would have continued around the place where it was stopped instead of its center axis. This clip here is from the same crew, but this rotation is nice and slow and a lot more controlled. The last thing I want to point out is that, especially when lifting these 6-meter segments that are lying down, when you have it upright, make sure that all 3 slings are taut. That means that all 3 slings are connected at their maximum length. To illustrate this, you can see here that the Loadmaster connects to slings, and as the pilot lifts the load, you can see that the rightmost sling is not connected at its maximum length. And usually this will happen, it'll just pop out. But if this doesn't happen at the pickup point, it may happen at the assembly. And that is obviously not a surprise you want when putting the segments on top of each other. And this is more likely to happen if you have a very short distance from the pickup point to the assembly point, and you're using the lighter sections, which are only about 650 kilos. Alright, so that's it for this video. I hope it has been insightful, and hopefully it has given some of you a better understanding by seeing it from all the different angles. And I'd just like to point out again that the most important thing with this type of operation is to just take your time, do a thorough brief beforehand so that everybody's on the same page, and watch your hands. If you do those things, this operation will go smoothly. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.